Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's NIF webinar. I'm Libby Lenkinski, and we're going to give it just a couple of seconds as people get situated here in the Zoom room. We had a pretty overwhelming response to this invitation, so we're expecting a lot of people today. Thank you very much for tuning in. I'm going to give it a few seconds as I still see numbers rising and people joining, but I will get us started momentarily so that we don't feel crunched for time. Let's see. The numbers are not slowing down, but I am going to go ahead and get us started. Worst case scenario is people will miss my opening, which they've probably heard more than once. Welcome, everyone, to our first NIF online event of 2025. We really are thrilled to see hundreds of people joining us today. I'm continuing to let people roll in, but I want to thank you for being here for this critical conversation. I'm Libby Lenkinski. I'm NIF's Vice President for Public Engagement, and I'm honored to host this webinar on behalf of New Israel Fund Global. That means we're joined today also by people from Canada, the UK, Israel, Europe, maybe Australia for the sleepless ones, and all across the US. I think your ongoing presence in these events really does underscore the strength of our community worldwide. I want to take a minute and send love and support to our friends and our community in Los Angeles and Southern California, many of whom are still grappling with the aftermath of the fires. You're in our hearts and our thoughts. But that is not what we're here to talk about today. Today's discussion focuses on the hostage and ceasefire deal that was reached last week between Israel and Hamas, an agreement that so many of us have hoped for, have prayed for, have fought for, and struggled for over many months. And I have to say, I think, like so many other people, I'm feeling some mixed emotions. Obviously, relief and joy to see the 3 women hostages return to their mothers and their families. That was quite a moment. Relief at the cessation of bombings in Gaza, and to see people actually celebrating in Gaza after so much devastation, especially among women and children over the last 15 months. Anger and questions about the fact that it seems like this deal probably could have been reached months earlier, and many of us don't understand why it wasn't. And then deep concern and anxiety about whether it will hold and whether it will actually bring an end to this horrible situation and this war. I have a lot of questions. What led to this deal happening now? Who should take credit for it? Never mind who is taking credit for it. What are the implications for Israeli policies, for US-Israel relations? What does it mean for NIF? What will happen next? And so I'm very grateful that we have some experts here to help navigate these questions. Noa Landau, Deputy Editor-in-Chief of Haaretz, Aaron David Miller, Middle East expert and former State Department negotiator, and Mickey Gitzin, NIF's director in Israel. I'm going to leave time for Q&A at the end, but feel free to put questions or comments, mainly questions, in the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and I'll be looking at them throughout and trying to bring your questions and thoughts into the conversation as we go and at the end. So just to introduce our speakers a little bit more fully before I start peppering them with my questions and yours. Noa Landau is the Deputy Editor-in-Chief of Haaretz newspaper and the founder of Haaretz 21, a project amplifying underrepresented voices in Arab Palestinian communities in Israel. She has served various roles at Haaretz and previously worked at Army Radio, Channel 10, and Ma'ariv. Noa is also an advisory board member and alumnus of the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism at Oxford University. Welcome, Noa. Aaron David Miller is a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and the host of Carnegie Connects. A former State Department negotiator, Aaron advised U.S. Secretaries of State on Middle East policy for over 2 decades. He's a frequent commentator on CNN, NPR, and the BBC, and a member of NIF's International Board. Aaron is the author of 5 books, including The Much Too Promised Land and 4 others. Welcome, Aaron.
Thanks, Libby.
Mickey Gitzin, who I hope you all know by now, but for some newbies out there, Mickey is the director of NIF in Israel and founder of Israel Be Free Israel, a grassroots organization advocating for the separation of religion and state. Mickey has served as spokesperson for MK Ilan Gilon of Meretz and an emissary, a shaliach for the Jewish Agency for Israel, where he served in South Bend, Indiana. A detail I never get through his bio without mentioning, even when it's not written. I want to start by asking Noa, just based on your reporting and what you've seen, what actually did lead to this deal being reached?
Hi,
Simple
everyone.
question.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for inviting me. Well, in some aspects, it is pretty simple. Of course, many would say, and you can say, that President Trump's ultimatum is what brought the deal. He basically, said it very, very clearly that he expects all sides to complete the negotiations before he takes office. That's on one hand. But on the other hand, you can also say that Trump actually was delaying the deal, because we know that the same deal, the exact same deal, as far as we know, was on the table in May, back in May, when more Israeli hostages were still alive, and they're not now. And back in May, Netanyahu was the one who did not want to sign the deal finally. And we do know that, he told people that he wants to gift this deal to Trump, that, since the results of the election, he knew that it's important that Trump will want this, to gift this to him. So on that aspect, you can also say that Trump delayed the same deal that Biden's team already had on the table.
Thank you, Noa. I want to pick up where you left off and go to Aaron, and ask you, Aaron, from your experience in the behind the scenes and in front of the scenes dealings of Washington and Israel, from your perspective, how did they get here? How did this get to where it is now, on the Washington side in particular?
Thanks, Libby, and it's great to be here with Noa and Mickey and you, and thank NIF, an extraordinary organization, for sponsoring this. Look, people ask me all the time, why did it take 15 months to unwind at least the first phase of this deal? And my answer, based on my own experience, has a lot to do with the reality that combatants involved in a conflict that is perceived by each of them either to be existential or near existential, either with respect to their security interests or their political interests. Those sorts of conflicts tend to be extremely difficult for external parties to mediate. And this was a rather remarkable organization. I've been a part of negotiations in crisis situations, dealing with Israel and Lebanon, Israel and the Palestinians, from the late 80s until I left the State Department in 2003. But this is an extraordinarily complicated negotiation. It involved 2 parties, both of whom are committed to one another's mutual destruction. There was no direct negotiation between the 2 sides. It was brokered and monitored by a number of mediators. The three of them, the Qataris, the Egyptians, and the Americans, all had their own different agendas and their own different views of how this negotiation should be structured. Just the fact that the internal leadership of Hamas, when Yahya Sinwar was still alive, was communicating with the external leadership, and the Israelis were monitoring communications using every conceivable technical device to identify where Sinwar and the other senior leaders were. It's extraordinary that the internal leadership managed to coordinate and convey their positions to the external leadership, the so-called hotel boys, those who had no control over hostages, no control over the military conflict, and no control over Gaza, were actually they were the cutouts with whom the Qataris, the Egyptians, we don't negotiate directly with Hamas. I won't make such an authoritative statement with respect to the Israelis. So it was a complex negotiation. And I guess I would say, I'm asked also why. Well, I'm asked a lot of questions about the absence of sustained and significant pressure on the part of the Biden administration during the course of this negotiation. I would only say a couple of things. Number one, the minute the previous administration, decided that the only way to de-escalate the war was an actual negotiation and a potential agreement between an American ally on one hand and an organization that is designated by statute and law, American law, as a foreign terrorist organization, an organization that had engaged on October 7th in willful and indiscriminate killing of civilians, sexual predation, mutilation, the taking of hostages, the execution of hostages, that the minute the Biden administration surrendered to that as the vehicle, they set themselves up for an interminable negotiation between two leaders, Benjamin Netanyahu on one hand and Yahya Sinwar on the other. And governing is about choosing. Governing is about choosing. It's about setting priorities. Neither Sinwar nor Netanyahu, and this is not one hand clapping, this is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This is not a conflict between the forces of goodness on one hand and the forces of darkness on the other. It's much more complicated. Neither Sinwar nor Netanyahu, in my judgment, and if you believe our negotiating team, had any real urgency to cut this deal. And because it was a deal between Israel and Hamas, that very fact between an American ally and a terrorist organization minimized the amount of influence and pressure the Biden administration could place in the negotiations, and it expanded the amount of influence that the Prime Minister of Israel could exert. Why it came together in the end? Three factors. Number one, Hamas as a military organization was now alone. The Israelis had hollowed out Hezbollah, had weakened Iran considerably, and were now able to direct all of their combat power to one front. There was no axis of resistance to support Hamas except for the Houthis, who are a significant problem, but not a critical or existential threat either to the negotiations or to Israel. So that was one factor, Hamas's weakness. Second, I think the Netanyahu felt emboldened enough on one hand, having demonstrated Israel's escalation dominance against Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran, and yet attentive, very attentive to the influence and potential policies of the incoming administration, that it came together in the way that it did. And one last point. There is no, I was State Department for 27 years, working for half a dozen secretaries of state of both political parties. There is absolutely no precedent for an uninaugurated president and his unofficial envoy to be deployed in as visible and as coordinated a manner with an outgoing administration. Absolutely no precedent for this. It was, if you wanted to be positive, a moment of extraordinary bipartisanship, which is the headline. I think over the last week, we've seen that the trend line may not move in that direction. But again, Hamas's weakness, Netanyahu's conviction that he was strong enough to do this deal and vulnerable enough to Trump that he needed to do it. And again, to give the Biden administration the credit that they deserve, they laid the foundation, the conceptual foundation of an agreement that could have been reached, as Noah said, and Libby, you hinted as well, as early as May of this past year.
Thank you. I have to just reflect that I know we're having an analytic conversation here, but to hear you say so clearly that there wasn't urgency until now on the part of the so-called leadership that was around the table to make the deal, when so many people, when so many people's lives were hanging in the balance or had been killed, while all of us here watching the news felt such a huge sense of urgency, is just very stark and disturbing.
I mean, I just add one point again, and I've dealt with a variety of Israeli prime ministers. Israel's need, and let's use the word because it didn't dominate Israeli military policy, but it clearly was a part of it. Israel's need to avenge the dead, the hundreds that were killed, particularly the civilians on October 7th, was not accompanied by the urgency that was, in my judgment, necessary to redeem the living. And it is that sort of contrast and poignancy that makes this such a human tragedy.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Mickey, I want to ask you, what has the response been among civil society in Israel? And is there also an effective role, which we'll talk about more later as well, that civil society can play in a situation that is so controlled at the top? And somebody in the Q&A already asked about standing together and other grassroots movements, and whether there's like any influence, any role, and also just in general, like what's the reaction among our organizations and activists on the ground?
Yes, so thank you everyone, and it's really great to be here. And it's also really great to speak about a ceasefire deal and hostages coming back, and not on a continuous war that we are used to talk and have been through in the last 15 months. I mean, like, we need to acknowledge the moment sometimes, and it's important that we do that. We usually speak about civil society, we speak about, the NIF community and our organizations, but it needs to be very clear. The Israeli society is split on this deal. The majority probably supports it, but the majority among these coalition supporters do not support that. I think that the issue of the hostages coming back and the ceasefire has become and was a serious political issue within Israeli society, and it's important to understand it, because I think that in so many ways, many of us feel like it's clear people want hostages back. It's clear people want to stop the war, but it's not clear. I think the notion of continuing the war and in parts of this government, at least, and its supporters, to bring Jews to live within the Gaza Strip, to undo the annexation process, was a big thing, and people were willing, and some leaders are still willing to pay with the price of the hostages. So internally in Israel, it's not received as it's received by us, I want to say. And here comes the question, so what's the role of civil society? And I think that it's something that, as opposed to a legislation or a court case or many other things that we can usually measure very clearly, we were successful or not successful. I think that public opinion and the debate over public opinion and the ability to create a counter narrative to this government narrative on the streets of Israel, on social media, among people with different opinion was very significant in order to hold this struggle alive. We at NIF were in close touch, and as many of you know, enough Tango here, one of the mothers of one of the hostages that are still there, even have received the prize from us. When you talk to the hostage families, one of the things that you keep on hearing, the fact that Israeli society, or so many of you, have been with us on the streets and continue fighting with us, has allowed us as families to continue this struggle. I mean, these families would continue doing whatever they can to release their dear ones. But I think that's exactly where civil society, or people like us, and our activism does make a difference to the people who lead the fight. Let's not be mistaken. The people who lead the fight are the families. The people who lead the fights are the people who actually are out there as part of the family forums and others. But I think the support system that they've received was very significant, and even part of them direct support from grantees are like ours, like the Citizens HQ or Mechazkim, which is one of the online apparatuses that we support, and others. So of course, no one would give a direct, like there is no clear direct contribution of organizations, but the atmosphere on the street, the political struggle that we supported for a different solution, and the support that the families who led this struggle have felt among people like ourselves were very significant. And solidarity is a prize that is not measurable, but is extraordinarily important when you talk about a 15 months reality in which we fight against this war and hostages being held in Gaza.
Thanks, Mickey. Noa, let's talk about the actual political implications of the deal in terms of the Israeli government, the coalition. What are you seeing in terms of how it's affecting politics and how politics is affecting the longevity of the deal?
Well, the clearest implications are that Itamar Ben-Gvir's party, Otzma Yehudit, had to resign from the government. We all saw that, of course. Although it's not that clear if Netanyahu thinks or wants them to stay out, or is he actually saving their ministries for them. It was just announced today that he's giving one of Likud members all the portfolios that they left, all three. So that's basically a massive sign that he's willing to kind of save these roles for them for when they come back, which we're not sure when. It could indicate, by the way, of course, the biggest question here is the second phase of the deal. We didn't talk a lot about the actual details of the deal, but there's a real risk, and I think what Mickey said about Israeli society has a massive effect on that also. On the question whether we're actually going to see phase 2. Phase 3, I'm not even talking about that, but phase 2 is seriously in danger. So the question if whether Itamar Ben-Gvir is coming back to this government or not is also an indication for the future of the rest of this deal. We're also seeing that Bezalel Smotrich, who also kind of threatened to resign but didn't, by the way, because the polls are really bad for him at the moment. So I think for him, toppling this government is not such a good idea politically at the moment. But we're also seeing that Netanyahu is trying to gift Smotrich all kinds of horrible gifts in terms of Israeli interest. For example, today we learned that there are a lot of blockades now around some of the Palestinian cities in the West Bank, specifically Ramallah is basically almost siege now. You can't really, you can try to leave or enter Ramallah, but it will take you like 5-6 hours. One of our reporters was stuck in one of the blockades. So it was just published today that this was Smotrich's specific personal request from Netanyahu, from the government. So on one hand, you see that the government is much more sensitive to anything that Smotrich wants. On the other hand, we also saw that a lot of the leaders, not a lot, but some of the leaders in the opposition, more the center-leaning ones, from Lapid and others, said that they will actually give a safety net to Netanyahu in order to see this deal come through. So on one hand, of course, Netanyahu's more natural partners, the ones that he feels safer with, which is the far right, are threatening to resign. Some resigns or semi-resigned. Resigned, but we don't know if they're coming back. So that looks like that could maybe weaken him. But on the other hand, the opposition is actually giving him a safety net. So, as usual, for some reason, Netanyahu has it, the situation is not that bad from all sides. But as I always say to people who ask me, how come Netanyahu is surviving this disaster all this time? I always say, well, there weren't any elections. There's no election, so we don't know if he actually is surviving it. It all depends really on elections.
Noah, can I stay with you for a minute and just bring in a question from the chat that's related, which is, if Otzma Yehudit, the Jewish Power Party, Itamar Ben-Gvir's party, if they remain outside of the coalition, does that pose an actual risk in any way that the coalition will collapse and that we will go to elections?
So as I said, at the moment, they're out, and the government is still fine, mainly because of Gideon Sa'ar, who joined. But also, again, some of the actors in the opposition, the Jewish oppositions, are offering a safety net, even if Smotrich leaves as well. So Itamar Ben-Gvir resigned, but he didn't. But we don't know, if he's not coming back. And Smotrich claimed that he will resign, but he didn't. And the opposition is giving a safety net. So I will say the government is more stable on one hand. On the other, we also know that statistically, and if you look at, the past, there are two seasons in Israel, war and elections, right? So it's either war, it's either elections. If you're just thinking about it statistically, then if war ended, there'll probably be elections. But that's just statistics. That's not, what we're seeing currently.
Thank you. Statistics and perhaps incentive. Aaron, I want to ask I'm going to ask the question that I originally planned to ask you, which is, how do you think the deal will shape future Israel-US relations? But I also want to ask about about Trump and the move that he made to reverse the sanctions on settlers that had been put into place by the Biden administration, and whether, from your estimation, that's connected. Like, was that some kind of quid pro quo? Is it unrelated? And how might that also shape, alongside the deal, how might that shape US-Israel relations in the short term?
Yeah. I think it was Jonathan Alter who wrote a very good biography of the late President Jimmy Carter. Alter said that all presidents are blind dates. And thinking through, now we're 3-4 days into the Trump administration, there's a lot we still don't know. And I think we have to be incredibly respectful of what we don't know with regard to the now the president's foreign policy generally and the way he's going to deal with the Middle East. What we know about Donald Trump in Trump 1.0 was the fact that he fashioned himself to be the most pro-Israeli president in the history of the relationship, if not the history of the universe. And he created, my words, I've written about this and said it publicly, he created what I would describe as a sugar high for, largely for Benjamin Netanyahu, recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, moving the embassy, extending or recognizing sovereignty over the Golan Heights. In an effort to cement Moroccan participation in the Abraham Accords, he recognized Moroccan sovereignty over the Western Sahara. These, I would argue, these moves in Trump 1.0 were easy lifts. They were moves that could be done by a declaration. Trump 2.0 is different. What we don't know is the sensibility that Donald Trump brings to his second term, and all presidents. The notion that the American national interest is somehow fashioned and hammered out in a hermetically sealed bell jar, basically clinically sort of reasoned out, is simply wrong. The sensibilities, the prejudgments that presidents bring to the Oval Office is critically important to how American policy turns out. I'd only point out to you the last 15 months of the Biden administration. The question I get most frequently asked is, why didn't Joe Biden choose to bring the kind of significant or sustained pressure in an effort to alter the policies of Israel's prosecution of the war objectives he agreed with? It was the way in which Israel waged the war on issues such as humanitarian assistance, inability or refusal to talk about the day after in Gaza, or how to minimize civilian deaths and casualties. Joe Biden exerted no pressure that normal humans would regard as serious or sustained. Now, why was that? And my answer is because of the nature, the emotional and political bandwidth of Joe Biden. Those expecting Biden to pressure Israel were setting up a test for the president he could not possibly pass as a consequence of this deep and abiding, I would say, love, not for the current government of Israel, to be sure, but for the people of Israel, for the security of Israel, and for the idea of Israel. Joe Biden's image of Israel was tethered, I would mark it somewhere around the late 60s, early 70s. And as a consequence of that relationship, he wasn't able. Donald Trump brings a different sort of sensibility. His regard for the national interest, I think, is much less important to him than his financial interests, his political interests, his vanity, and his power. And that's why there's a lot about how Donald Trump may actually react to the current situation that we don't know. The hostage prisoner exchange, and Noah's right for pointing out the challenge that lies ahead. 16 days, it's now what, 13 days after day one? Negotiations are to begin on the second phase of this agreement. And the second phase is a very heavy lift. Now for Mohammed Sinwar, Yahya's brother, and a couple of other brigade commanders inside that are making decisions, and a very, very heavy lift for Benjamin Netanyahu, because it compels Sinwar to basically return all of the hostages, the 65 male IDF soldiers, both living and dead, that are presumed to be not just in Hamas's hands, but perhaps in the hands of Palestine Islamic Jihad or criminal elements or families and clans. And it compels Benjamin Netanyahu and Hamas to end the war and for the Israelis to withdraw from Gaza. Those are lifts, in my judgment, that this Israeli government cannot make without fracture. So the first test is coming for Donald Trump and Israel, is coming in a matter of weeks, because Donald Trump owns this now. He claimed credit for it. He deployed his senior negotiator, Steve Witkoff, who, by the way, just today, Barak Ravid is reporting that Witkoff will also handle Trump's policies with respect to Iran. And that's the real question. Does Donald Trump want this agreement a pre-inaugural success, his first foreign policy success, to crater on his watch? And if he doesn't, what leverage is he prepared to exert in order to persuade Hamas on one hand, and certainly Benjamin Netanyahu on the other, to move from phase one to phase two? So again, humility is the order of the day here. Right now, we just don't know.
Thank you for all of that. And I wanna invite Noah and Mickey to add to that also as we continue through the conversation. And also feel free to, ask each other things if there's something that someone is saying that you want to challenge or go deeper on. Mickey, I want to ask you about so we talked a little bit about what civil society groups are doing and have been doing. I want to ask a little bit more about that in terms of the various scenarios for what might be coming. And I also want to ask, and this is a very hard question, but it's coming in a few ways in the chat. The basic question is, do Israelis care about the devastation and the deaths in Gaza of Palestinians? And is there a way for that care to increase? Is there what's going on there? People are noticing that the conversation remains very focused, not just on this webinar, but the conversation, capital C, remains focused on the hostages. And even when we're talking about the upswing in settler violence in the West Bank, it seems to be that the actual experience of Palestinians is not the part that's getting across, or that people are really consumed with talking about. And so I want to ask from your perspective, and of course, New Israel Fund supports NGOs who are heavily engaged in protecting the lives and livelihoods of Palestinians as well. So we're not representative of the mainstream of the Israeli mindset, but Mickey, you are very tapped into all of that from your media consumption and your work. And so can you talk a little bit about those elements?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for this question. I think it's an important question. As you cannot speak about the Americans, you can't speak about the Israelis. I mean, I know I care about lives of Palestinians. I know Noah cares about lives of Palestinians. I know many of us do care about lives of Palestinians, and many of the groups we support have made it very clear and loud to care about the hostages returning, and at the same time speaking about lives of Palestinians and the devastating reality in Gaza. And it was important to us to be speaking about it because this is the right thing to do. At the same time, it also needs to be said, societies tend to be closer to themselves, to think about their own loved one. We all know people that somehow were connected to hostages or people that were killed during this war, and it's clear that we feel closer emotionally and in our narratives to Israelis. But yeah, we might not be the majority, but there is a significant group of Israelis who care about it. When you walked around demonstrations connected to hostages, you did see signs speaking about ceasefires, you did see signs speaking about lives of Palestinians. And I think keeping this torch and these voices within the Israeli discourse has been a significant contribution of the organizations we support and civil society. And I think it shouldn't be undermined. I mean, Israeli society as Palestinian society is a post-traumatized or traumatized societies. Bringing up these issues, caring about the other, the other is It's a very, very hard thing to do. And I think that the level of engagement that people from our side did it was very, very significant. I think that also NIF launching and as a proactive matter and not only as a reactive matter, the issue of different ways of pursuing security, bringing up to the table into the public discourse issues of peacemaking, regional deals, issues to do with what will be the next stage the day after. Civil society was very significant in trying to bring these issues up, and it was not easy. It was a kind of like, going against the mainstream. And I think that we were somehow successful with part of opposition leaders and politicians that started by not mentioning it at all, and now they're in a different stage in the discourse. So we are working here in creating both public opinion, or at least influencing public opinion, but also working with the political system. Because as Noah said, easily, without public pressure, without organizations that work on these issues, not only the media, but also the political system could have gone completely in a different way. And I think that when people like even Yair Lapid says that the hostages are more important than continuing the war needs to stop, all of these kind of things are things that are connected to what he feels and thinks people and the public things. And I think that the notion that it's legitimate and the research that we've done along with the code and other grantees of ours who do research on public opinions shows that when you feel and you think that your surrounding think something, for example, ending the war is the right thing to do, or bringing back the hostages is more important than continuing the war, is what brings politicians and decision makers and so on to be able to speak as they speak. So I know that from far away, it sounds like obvious things to say or kind of like natural things to do. But within the Israeli society as it is today, those are things that were built and created by a lot of work and systematic research and influence and meeting with politicians and journalists and others in order to create this discourse that might have been minority for some period of time and then became a majority. It was actually quite interesting to see polls that we do all the time. The moment the hostages, the hostage deal was signed, the level of support to the hostage deal has gone up significantly within Israeli public. Because when people start feeling or thinking about things that are getting real, or definitely after they see the pictures, reality changes for them. So I want to say that for people who support the Israel Fund and their organizations, we should feel very proud, despite the fact that it's much above everything we do. I think that keeping the Israeli discourse where it is now and trying to influence the way people think on this issue in particularly has been a very hard work. Most of it and most of the credit needs to go to the families and the people who work on these issues, but definitely the support system that we've created is something that can be measured, but can be definitely spoken up as I just did.
Thank you. I think one thing that that I want to underline from both what you just said and what Aaron has been saying is the role of humility, not presuming that we know what people think, what they will do, because I'm seeing a lot of questions coming into the Q&A about, wait, I thought that the humanitarian corridor was supposed to be this, but you just said that X happened, or Trump said this, but wasn't he? A lot of confusion about what information we can trust and who knows what at what time. And so I want to ask, oh, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, can I
Please.
just make an observation about this, because it's critically important. We have more information at our fingertips now than at any point since time began. And yet I would argue on this subject and on many others, we are lazier and we are dumber, because we have contracted out to our favorite newscasts, our favorite country, our favorite organization, our responsibility for doing our own homework. Every single day of my life in this space, the Middle East is an unassembled jigsaw puzzle on my living room floor. And every single day, I try to read as widely as I possibly can, talk to as many people as I possibly can to assemble the jigsaw puzzle the way I think, guided by my own analysis. And if the pieces don't fit, I don't try to shove them in. I put them off in a corner as sort of interesting things to be considered. And it's critically important. We've lost the capacity, sadly, to do serious thinking. And the access to information should help us in this regard, but I think it hasn't. It's contributed to multitasking, and we're bombarded now, and we tend to go with what's easy. This conflict, if you want to study it, you need to get out of your comfort zone. You need to stretch, and you need to do what is very hard. Forget sympathy. You need a degree of empathy that is critically important to any solution. And if you don't have it, then what you are is a cheerleader, frankly, for one side or another. And we don't need cheerleaders. We need problem solvers.
Thank you so much. The Middle East is an unassembled jigsaw puzzle on my living room floor, and every day I talk to as many people and read as much as I can to assemble it anew. That is an image that will stay with me. That will stay with me. Thank you so much for that, and I agree. I see that Noa has dropped off for the moment, so I'm gonna redirect and ask some questions here in the chat, which have to do with both the role of the American ambassador to Israel, the renowned evangelical leader Mike Huckabee, and also what could a potential role of the mainstream American Jewish community be in vis-a-vis the new American administration when it comes to issues like the next phases of the deal, the cessation of violence against Palestinians in the West Bank. So both, what do we think the impact of the new ambassador could be, and what could also the impact of the mainstream American Jewish community be on some of these policies? And I'm asking everybody. So whoever would like to start on that one should feel welcome.
I mean, I'd make a comment on the ambassador. I think this is actually the first non-Jewish ambassador since 2008, maybe 2010. The evangelical community in America has been an extraordinary source of support for Israel. It's probably, arguably, maybe not among young evangelicals, but certainly on part of evangelicals of a certain age, my age, has been incredibly supportive. And yet this is the first time you had an evangelical Christian as U.S. ambassador. And again, I don't know Mike Huckabee. I look forward to meeting him at some point. I would venture to say the following, however. This strikes me as a performative appointment. I do not believe that Mike Huckabee's views on Israel, on the West Bank, on annexation, on biblical prophecy or the end of days is going to have much influence on Donald Trump. Donald Trump wants deals if he can get them. And I wouldn't pay as much attention to the front men and women who occupy the positions that he's appointed them to, as much as I would the backroom deal makers. Stephen Witkoff is an example of this, right? No diplomat, experience in the real estate business, trust to the president, access to the president. These are the kind of people I suspect, and who knows who's going to be Trump's envoy on Ukraine, which could preoccupy much of his time. But it's deal makers, and they're not diplomats.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Noa, Mickey, anything to add about the ambassador, the role the American Jewish community might play And any other comments about this sort of, I don't want to call it the post-truth era, but an era of extreme access to information and yet a lot of confusion about what's really going on?
No, but I have two other points that I think we should maybe mention.
Please.
One is, as Aaron said before, the second phase of the deal is could be very difficult for the government. But I think we should also mention that as far as we know right now, there's also a big leverage, which is the Saudi deal. And Trump's intention to bring in the Saudis is also a massive incentive for this specific Israeli government, or specifically Netanyahu. You know, if we were too pessimistic before about the chances of this deal, we have to say that, you know, there's also something else on the balance here, which is the normalization with the Saudis, which is for Netanyahu the holy grail. And another thing we should remember is you know, we said several times the day after in Gaza, the day after in Gaza. The actual most important central question of, you know, the slogan the day after in Gaza is the PLO going to participate in ruling Gaza? And we're seeing, you know, this is a very, very critical moment right here. And there's it started to be an important discussion in Israel. And of course, you know, a lot of political pressures around it. But I think this is maybe the last opportunity to form any kind of a Palestinian unity government. If you bring in the Saudis and, you know, all the Abraham Accords countries to the picture, and you do not include in the end the PLO, this will be, I think, probably something that we will never be able to take back. It will be, I personally think it will be a disaster, because we're just going to go to the same point all over again. Because Netanyahu can say over and over, you know, today they said that those who will be in charge of the crossing points in Gaza will be Gazans that are not in Hamas, right? It's an interesting euphemism. I don't know who exactly are these people, how they're going to choose them, etc. But as we wrote in Haaretz's editorial today, it basically means that Netanyahu is choosing Hamas in practice again over the PLO. So I think these are 2 points that you know, it's worth following.
I mean,
Please.
I was going to say, Noah raises some very good points, particularly on the issue of leadership. You know, we focus on Israeli leadership for obvious reasons, but there's a reality here. If there's any hope at all of creating a pathway out of this and turning October 7 and the horrors that Israelis and Palestinians have inflicted on one another, the traumas which will affect an entire generation, then you're going to need leaders. And in the end, it's all about leadership. But it's not just leaders on the Israeli side. It's leaders on the Palestinian side. And the Palestinian national movement faces a critical juncture here. I would argue it's neither Hamas on one hand, nor Mahmoud Abbas on the other. And if that is in fact the case, then the issue of legitimacy, how to legitimize a new governing authority, a new Palestinian leadership, is going to be critically important. It's politically inconvenient to have to admit it, but it's true that Hamas is going to survive. It probably will not be able to govern Gaza, but it will survive as an insurgency should the Israelis return, able to intimidate and co-opt whatever governing structure or whoever presumes to rule Gaza. And this question of the security, the economics, and the politics of Gaza is critically important. One final point, it ties into Noah's point about the Israeli-Saudi deal. If Trump wants an Israeli-Saudi normalization deal, then all roads will lead back to Gaza, and all roads will lead back to something beyond Gaza, some political horizon with respect to the future of the Israeli-Palestinian relationship. Now, I would argue the least bad solution is separation through negotiation into two states. But two states right now is a thought experiment. You're going to need to construct a vision and a very practical set of pathways to get there. But Noah's right. All these issues, second phase, Saudi deal, Palestinian leadership, they're all connected. And again, I'll make the point, they're all happening on the watch of one Donald Trump. He is now responsible. He could walk away or he could seek to engage. We'll find out soon enough.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to mention one thing, Libby.
Please,
I
yeah,
think I've
please.
seen it a lot in the question, and I think it's important to mention it. It's really clear that, you know, when our eyes are on Gaza, the reality in the West Bank is just deteriorating by the hour. It's a mixed collaboration between the Israeli army, which is in a different kind of problem. We're not here to analyze the Israeli army, but we see the influence of politicians directly within the IDF, something that has never happened in such level. We're seeing really like Ben-Gvir and Smotrich's troops within the IDF operating in the West Bank in collaboration with settlers, and the level of violence is just unbelievable. We're lucky enough these days to have also human rights organizations reporting about them and seeing and knowing about it so fast. In the past, it was not the case. And I think it's important to notice it. But I think that, you know, it's a warning point. The reality in the West Bank is becoming as impossible as it was in other places. I think that Palestinians are at the point that there is nothing to lose. We're seeing the PLO or the PA in this case losing power and influence on what's going on in the streets of the main streets. You know, Noah has mentioned Ramallah, that has been, you know, is the capital basically, and of course in Jenin and Nablus and other places. This is an extraordinarily troubling reality and also very dangerous reality that Israel is creating with its own forces. And I think it needs to be said very clearly. Israel is creating the next situation in which we as Israelis will need to deal with another intifada or violence or anything like that, you know, and of course the reality in which Palestinians live. But I think that, you know, we as people look at West Bank, but the world doesn't look at the West Bank. And while the world is looking at Gaza, what's going on in the West Bank is getting worse by the hour. And it has to be said very clearly in this panel.
Thanks, Mickey. I mean, this call is full of hundreds of New Israel Fund supporters all around the world. So as you know and can imagine, people are uncomfortable with just letting it play out. And so I've been getting a lot of personal messages here in the Q&A and on the chat about what can we do, which is my favorite part of working at New Israel Fund for all these years, that is always the question. What can we do? How can we help? And, you know, I don't want to be Pollyannish about it. These are really big dynamics that individuals may or may not have the ability to actually influence. But because so many people are asking, what are some things that we can have in mind to do to support better futures at this point in time? And I think I'll fold that in with asking you each for a very short closing remark that we can walk away with. Mickey, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, I'm actually feeling that, you know, because of everything that Aaron and Noah have said about Trump and the current administration, I used to say, you know, call your congressman, you know, get involved in your American politics and so on. I'm not sure that in the way Trump sees politics, and definitely when the way he looks at the American Jewish community, it will be the same way that we would think of other politicians. So we kind of like need to change the answer and the way we think. And I think that we need to start kind of like rethink about what can you do. But I do think that one of the main things that are extraordinarily important is again, with a limited impact on reality, but important, are the reactions of what's going on here in Israel and the level of support and the level of ability of those who work day and night to bring back their dear ones. and their influence on the political system in Israel and internationally. So as much as you can support and the hostage families, the organizations that support the hostage families, those who go on the street and work in solidarity with them, I think it's extremely important. And it does influence their lives. It will not change reality because it's just bigger than any specific action, but it's extraordinarily important. And yeah, let's learn together about how we influence American politics during Trump days. I think it's a big challenge for people like ourselves.
Thanks, Mickey. How about you, Noah?
Thought it was obvious, support NIF and read Haaretz, no?
Amen.
That was much easier than mine.
I think jokes aside, I mean, if again, I'm going to repeat myself, but I think in terms of issues, of course, any pressure to go through with phase 2 is really important right now, but also raising the issue of, this maybe last opportunity to see a real change in Gaza in terms of what will happen there, so that we do not repeat the mistakes that we've made.
Thanks, Noah. How about you, Aaron? Also, a lot of people are saying, want me to deliver the message, go blue.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah. Ohio State may have won the national championship, but they lost to Michigan for a 4th year in a row. Keeps me smiling. Look, I guess my message is, and the to do here is hard. I mean, I basically have spent most of my life doing way too much talking and not enough listening. And I would basically say, number one, don't give up. Don't surrender to the forces of hopelessness and despair, because they're all around you. I was thinking the other day, my wife Lindsay and I were in Jerusalem on October 6, 1973. That until October 7 was the greatest trauma that the state of Israel had ever faced, the greatest intelligence failure. And yet, within 4 years of that trauma, I watched Anwar Sadat in Jerusalem. And 2 years later, I watched on the White House lawn, Jimmy Carter, Menachem Begin, and Sadat sign a full treaty of peace. We really can't see what's in front of us. We can't, both for good or ill. All we can do, it seems to me, is understand that the arc of history bends in ways that are very unpredictable, sometimes for good, sometimes for ill. And I know NIF feels this very strongly, but we each need to do everything we possibly can to try to bend that arc in the right direction. And I guess life's about your days and trying to figure out how to make them worthwhile. And on this particular issue, do everything you possibly can to bend the arc. It's a good prescription.
Thank you so much, Amen. I want to thank all 3 of you for your wisdom today. I feel like a lot of my questions, and I hope a lot of the questions from our supporters around the world were answered, as well as creating some new ones. At NIF, we remain steadfast in supporting civil society, defending democracy, and building a shared society in Israel. None of that would be possible without all of your engagement and support. As we get into 2025, our work remains a challenge in front of us, but on behalf of all of us, a big thank you for your ongoing support, and a huge thank you to our 3 speakers. It's really an honor to be in this conversation with you. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.